Today on the AI Applied podcast, we are talking healthcare, which I know is I love, but it's a real passion for Jaden especially. And there have been a couple of cool reports coming out that have gotten some traction, some in TechCrunch, some other studies around ophthalmology and other related fields. And it's been amazing to sort of see how systems like obviously ChatGPT and things like that are doing so well on like these first order fact-based questions as like higher order questions that like really they require like analysis and reasoning and things that we just didn't think AI would get to that fast. But this is going to have real world implications. Jaden, I'm going to throw this over to you. Like, what are you seeing in this space and what's getting you excited about it?
Yeah, so there's a recent report which came out of the University of Cambridge that I think is fascinating. Essentially, they kind of created like a benchmark and a test where they were testing real-life experts, ophthalmologists, against different AI models. So they did it against GPT-4, GPT 3.5, Palm 2 from Google, Llama from Meta, and they essentially gave kind of a bunch of different experts 87 multiple choice questions in this realm and tested it against the AI models. So the results were super, super interesting. GPT-4 did the best out of all of them. So, if you're going to hand over all your eye doctor work to an AI model, you might want to use GPT-4 at the moment. It got a score of 60 out of 87, which, of course, is not perfect. It's got a little ways to go. You'd probably want to have this thing improve a bit before it's operating on your eyes. But this was higher than the average score of a trainee. So trainees that were kind of learning this stuff got 59.7, so it scored higher than them. Junior doctors scored 37, so higher than junior doctors, but it did, and this is the important part, it was lower than the expert's average. So an actual ophthalmologist.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Got 66.4, which is, 6 points higher. But again, like out of 87, if the expert's getting 66, in my opinion, like 60s, I don't know, that's not too bad. What are your thoughts? As someone that wears glasses, and I do not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, listen.
Would you trust it?
I would, right? But this is the really interesting thing about this, right? Is that like on anything healthcare related, right? I think one of the big things in sort of taking us up is, first of all, try to remember, and this is the big thing with AI. It's also the big thing with self-driving cars. Why do people not get into self-driving cars? It's like, well, they get into, accidents 1 out of every, 100 times. But then you look at humans, it turns out humans get into accidents like 20 out of 100 times or something, right? So it's this weird benchmark that we have that would rather trust a human that does things worse than an AI that does things perfectly, but isn't totally perfect. Sort of exactly to your point about that benchmark, right? That's what's so interesting to me. But what I'm also, as an AI optimist, as I know you are too, the thing that I get also encouraged about, I guess, is that when people are starting to respond to this thing empathetically, right? So there's a bunch of papers around this. Jaden, you and I have sort of like looked at a bunch of stuff, like just even looking at knowing that we were going to be talking about this. But there's other papers sort of saying like, look, over time, the role of something like, let's call it an ophthalmologist, might evolve, and it might be sort of a shift toward more like uniquely human skills like empathy and communication and sort of like the big picture clinical judgment, and that AI is going to augment all that kind of stuff. But I want to actually this is AI applied, and I want to be real for a second here, because in some of these roles, it's like that study we talked about where people could tell that it was an AI and not a real doctor, but it turned out people actually, people appreciated the AI's bedside manner more than the doctor. And I am just not sure that we're so far away from people only trusting AI because they trust that it's going to come up with a better solution for them, and they trust that it is going to be more empathetic and give them sort of like a better bedside manner experience. And that is something that certainly a year ago I think would have felt utterly impossible, this combination of the two things. And the last thing I'll say, I want to kick it over to you, Jaden, on all this, like, is that when they did this study with radiologists, that was a while ago. It was probably 6 or 7 months ago or something like that. But what they were finding was that AI on their own with radiology did X well. Humans on their own with radiology did X minus whatever well. But the combination, let's combine them, and the combination actually did worse. And I think it's because people sort of, I don't know, radiologists were sort of like a little more protective. So I guess all that is to say, I totally get if people want the human connection as their doctor. That makes all the sense in the world to me. However, I think there is a growing small subset of people who are feeling like, hey, this thing is actually not only sort of like probably reading these charts better, but also empathetic,
Yeah, one thing I also want to bring up on this whole study, because I know a lot of people point to it and be like, oh, look, like, the experts did better than the AI. What's interesting about the study, you're in academia and you know this, these studies don't just happen and get published instantly. This study actually happened mid-2023, almost a full year ago. So, of course, LLM's capabilities to now are so much more advanced, right? I mean, they're quoting Palm 2 and what it could do. I mean, this isn't even looking at Google's Gemini. They're quoting Llama. This isn't looking at Google's Llama 3, which just came out yesterday. And also, this isn't quoting what GPT-5 potentially can do in the next, who knows, number of months. So I think that we're getting very close to a point where if a year ago, this is kind of the results we were seeing, we're not going to hear about the studies for probably another year on whatever they're looking at today. But this stuff is probably starting to outperform even the experts, I would imagine, at this point. And so I think the reason why all of this kind of matters is because if it's, it's already almost outperforming the average expert eye doctor, as these things get better, it's going to start beating specialists. People are going to start demanding, in my opinion, that they get an AI to help assess their results or look at, whatever, as a second opinion. Now, I know that what I'm going to say next is controversial, so hold on to your seats and, I don't know, whatever. My wife, she always goes to ChatGPT whenever she has some sort of symptom for something. Some people, they have like a perpetual medical fear that they're always going to die of something. She might fall a little bit into that camp, right? She always goes to ChatGPT for like advice on like symptoms of something. And I will tell you, it can diagnose things better, whether that's for one of our kids who's sick, most of the time better than like we do like the teledocs and like stuff like that, when people are sick. Honestly, ChatGPT gives the best advice. And I know that it's like, this is not a medical expert and you shouldn't trust it for medical advice. It gives fantastic advice. I also remember a story that came out about a year ago where there was a lady, she had a bunch of symptoms. She went to like 10 different specialists. No one could figure it out. She gave all the symptoms and everything to ChatGPT. It gave her a diagnosis. She went to the doctors, told it. They ran all the tests for that specifically and were like, yeah, that's what the issue is. So all of this to say, are human doctors replaced? No, I think that they're important. But I do think like illnesses are crazy. And there's so many illnesses that are 1 in 10,000, 1 in a million. It's very difficult, I would imagine, for a doctor to think of all the random illnesses and use cases tied to all of the symptoms. I think a tool like this is going to be really useful for doctors in the future.
No, 100%. And I remember that story as well about the woman finding it. And I'm so glad to kind of hear that, because so often you hear like it misdiagnosed. But again, it's sort of like the self-driving car that gets into an accident. One self-driving car getting into an accident can literally bring down a startup, which is insane, right? Because people are getting into accidents left and right, but there's just something that we get scared when we are not in control or another human is not in control. And on the doctors thing, I totally agree. I do not think this is going to like replace doctors in that meaningful way, but it sort of like reminds me of the New York taxi uprising sort of like over Uber. Right? It's like, oh my gosh, like we paid so much for these medallions, like $250,000 for this medallion or whatever it is, and all of a sudden it's going to be useless. And coming from New York City, my take on that was all like, man, I can't get a cab. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I mean, like, yes, that's great, but with doctors, like, I don't know how often you go to the doctor, like with your kids. I go every once in a while. You wait, and I'm not knocking the doctors; they're overworked. But like, my gosh, if you can sort of like just go in and have this thing like start to take all your records and start to take all your vitals and sort of like clean that up and all that kind of stuff, and then the doctor comes in and you're actually talking to a human and it's combining with that and all that kind of stuff, that feels like the huge win. So every time we're talking about like, well, is this going to take jobs? It's like, well, think about what we mean by taking jobs, right? I mean, like there are like something like healthcare is way too important to worry about like whether something is going to take jobs. Sorry, like it's, like I would much rather sort of like reskill or reemploy, but most importantly, we're still going to need all those doctors, everything. We're just going to be getting through patients and diagnosing things way faster. Walk into an ER and tell me if we don't need some AI doing something, right? I mean, like it's insane. So this is one of those things where I really do hope that it has a major implication on job displacement. And I have been encouraged when people have said to me, or when I've read in studies, that people actually love the bedside manner. And I think that with something like Pi, Inflection, which is no longer kind of like exactly what it was, but Hume AI, things like that are reading emotion, and character AI and things like that, I think people are getting more and more comfortable with it. And for me, that's a good thing.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is an area that is growing and is going to become more and more important. And to that point, we have another announcement that Hugging Face recently made, where they've released a benchmark for testing generative AI on healthcare tasks. I think this is important because I gave X a bunch of flack the other day. I gave them a bunch of crap because they came out with a new version of Grok, and they also came out with a new benchmark, which they were like, the best at. But their benchmark was for like, so like that's always like a funny, ironic thing, right? But at the same time, I think we're going to start seeing a lot of new benchmarks, and I do not think this is a bad thing because Grok, they made a benchmark that was for like spatial awareness stuff, and the idea, I'm assuming, is that their AI model Grok is going to get put into their Optimus humanoid robots. So it's like a model that's testing how those robots. There wasn't anything for that, right? So they had to create it. And likewise, LLM or Hugging Face is now making a new one for medical. I'll just read you the tweet. It says, open medical LLM leaderboards. In basic chatbots, errors are annoyances. In medical LLMs, errors can be life-threatening consequences. It's therefore vital to benchmark, follow advances in medical LLMs before thinking about deployment. So what they've essentially done, it's not a brand new thing. It's called Open Medical LLM, but essentially they've stitched together a bunch of different existing tests. So they have MedQA, PubMedQA, MedMCQA, a bunch of other ones. And essentially they're putting this all together to create a kind of general benchmark where it's going to test you on autonomy, pharmaceuticals, genetics, clinical practices, all of that. It's putting it all together. I'm really excited about this, as you probably can tell, because I think that we're moving into a place where like we're creating better benchmarks for medical uses. We're creating better AI models that can do this better. And I think that, like you mentioned, if you go into an overcrowded ER, like there is so many ways that I wish we could make the medical system in the United States cheaper. And I think that this is definitely one of the areas that could make a big impact.
Totally agree. I'm super excited about it. And we've had some great guests on this, and we'll probably kind of continue to do that too, to learn more from them. Folks, if you have enjoyed this AI Applied podcast, I have a personal favor to ask you. So are you ready? This is going to be a big one. If you can rate and review this on whatever platform you listen to, it would mean the absolute world to me. It would mean the absolute world to Jaden. And listen, if you do that, come on over to LinkedIn, drop me a DM, say like, hey, Connor, you asked me to do this. I did it. And I will send you every emoji on my laptop. I will send you so many thanks. You are going to feel like overwhelmed with like, oh my gosh, Connor, you don't have to thank me this much. That's how much it means to us, guys, because it actually really does allow us to get on better guests and be discovered and stuff like that. We do this for you guys, but it would really mean the world to us. Thank you so much for listening. Have a tremendous rest of your day.